G'day guys, ZiggyD here. Grim Dawn, it's good to be back. My action RPG mistress. It's been my go-to game when I want to break from the zooms of PoE but still want some meaty mechanics to sink my teeth into and some juicy builds and loot. Recently, the Forgotten Gods expansion came out with a new act and a new mastery and all the other trimmings you'd expect from an expansion. It's a solid expansion overall and I've enjoyed it quite a bit, but that's not what we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about this absolute lad right here. Did you know that you can dual wield shields in Grim Dawn now? This right here is my Thorns aka Retaliation build. Reflect damage builds, the ultimate action RPG meme. Actually viable in Grim Dawn? Kind of. Dual shields, max physique, life, armor, resistances, more armor, block, and armor. Hardcore viable and almost no direct damage. What more could you ask for in a build? Probably a lot. When I saw that Forgotten Gods expansion added a class with a bunch of retaliation damage to the Oathkeeper, along with a few mechanics changes to retaliation, I knew we'd have to give it a go. Grim Dawn's slower paced, more tactical combat style and powerful suite of defensive mechanics actually makes building a tanky character quite rewarding, and surprisingly I've actually had a lot of fun making this build so far, despite it not being all that fast, even by Grim Dawn standards. So, how have I made such a girthy boy like this? Starting out with the Oathkeeper, we quested along with Shield Throw with a bunch of points thrown into the bounce talent. When you want more damage, you put points into the base skill or Presence of Virtue aura for the powerful damage over time effects. It's kinda slow, but satisfying to play. You could alternatively whack on a two-hander and level with Force Wave in Soldier with a transmuter that makes it spammable. It's smarter, but that's cheating. I built pretty defensively and had some pretty slow fights, but it was actually pretty fun times playing Grim Dawn in hardcore as a tank like this. It reminded me of the glorious olden days of Path of Exile, where we built really tanky characters and crawled our way through the game slowly. Over time, I've leaned more and more into the meme, wearing whatever gear I could find that had retaliation damage, so long as it had decent defenses as well, of course. Good life and resists are the most important things, but regular upgrades to keep your armor high is important too, since there is a lot of physical damage flying around in Grim Dawn. Aegis of Men here, the shield throw skill, deals damage based on your shield. Grim Dawn actually has a damage stat value for shields, so regular shield upgrades are a must, and make sure to throw components into your gear. These days I'm using components to cap my resistances out, add more retaliation and armor. We build around block a fair bit in this character, and there's some pretty cool block procs you can get. And early on you can go into the Putrid Den in the old dump to kill Pusquill and find a pretty nice guaranteed unique monster infrequent shield called Bernard's Slightly Chewed Buckler, which is a pretty solid rare shield actually at this point in the game, with pseudo-randomized stats, but it has a strong Seismic Blast block proc skill on it. And if you're lucky, you might also be able to find an early pair of Razorback's Shoulders, this epic here, which has huge retaliation damage on them. I actually ended up using these for a long time until I eventually had to upgrade. At level 50, you can go full meme and get your dual shield action going by going to the Forgotten Gods town, and just below the waypoint is a hidden path that leads to a chest and some vases. I love the hidden areas in Grim Dawn like this. Break the vases and the unique mace, totally normal shield is in there. It's actually technically a mace, but you know, it's a shield. This thing right here is actually super legit for our build since we build around block quite a bit, and it has bonuses for block, as well as solid damage and a counter strike on block skill built into it that leverages our retaliation damage, which is quite nice. Stacking a lot of procs on a build like this, and many builds in Grim Dawn, is super satisfying. It's one of the real standout features of Grim Dawn, I think. I'll have a link in the description that's a planned skill tree, but you know, I'm changing things as I go, assuming I don't die, it might end up getting more refined over time. For mobility, I put a point into Vire's Might. It's a shield charge skill, can pass through some enemies, and we can also use it to engage. And I recommend after you kill the Warden in Act 1, going to the new expansion Act, Forgotten Gods expansion. You can go there immediately after the end of Act 1 and do it out of sequence. Just do the early parts at least, and grab a second movement skill. There's a whole bunch of choices from the various cult faction vendors, and I recommend one of the teleporting skills to round out your kind of mobility suite. The shield throw Aegis of Men here scales off of shield damage and retaliation. You can get the transmuter Aegis of Thorns, which adds retaliation damage to your attack. It lowers your damage a little bit, but that gets heavily outweighed by the added retaliation damage once you've actually stacked a fair amount of that. Reprisal also adds retaliation damage to the attack. While leveling, once I got more Thorns going, I've mostly been letting that and various procs kill things, and I only have a couple points into the actual Ages of Men here, with just a couple points extra for the bounces. And I mostly just use this to kill ranged attackers and some spellcasters that don't proc many of our retaliation style effects, and can be a little bit of a pain to kill otherwise, so the shield throw is handy for that. You can get an extra direct damage dealing skill through the serrated shell component that I put on my shield here. You can craft this at the blacksmith, and once you complete the set, not only do you get retaliation and shield recovery time, which is great for our block scaling, but you also get the brutal shield slam skill that you can throw on there, and it scales with retaliation damage, so this ends up being pretty nice. It's on a bit of a cooldown, but we don't really need to be attacking that much in this build. It's just occasionally, if we want to kill something that's not cooperating. Other main skills are the Presence of Virtue aura. Everything in this line is good. Bunch of survivability and retaliation scaling and added retaliation damage. So that is all very good stuff. And we also need the auras to attach devotions to that I'll get into a bit. Ascension is a very powerful buff as well. You'll eventually want to max this out. While it's up, you are very, very tanky thanks to the damage absorption value that it has, which is a very strong defensive mechanic in Grim Dawn. It works very powerfully, and this also gives you a huge boost of retaliation damage while it's up too. It's a 20-second recharge with a 10-second duration, so you use this against challenging enemies and big packs of enemies to give you survivability and damage, and then you alternate its use with, in the Soldier tree, Overguard, which also gives a bunch of survivability and damage absorption. Not any extra damage scaling, though it does give extra block stuff, which ends up becoming damage thanks to procs. Eventually you'll max this out as well. So because these are both 10-second durations with 20-second recharges, you just alternate between the two, and one of them can be active at all times during a fight. And then eventually you can get the Transmuter, which reduces its cooldown so you can have this active more often, if you like. It lowers your damage a bit, but that doesn't affect retaliation damage, only the direct damage you deal yourself with your skills. So this is quite nice because everything will still take full retaliation damage. Eventually, an Oathkeeper will probably want to push up, get a point in the Guardians and their upgrade, which strips enemy resistances. Resistance stripping in Grim Dawn is very powerful, so eventually we want to get that for the physical resistance stripping. In Soldier, Warcry is always nice for reducing enemies' health, and also Break Morale reduces physical resistances as well. You can stack different types of resistance shred in Grim Dawn, so this effect stacks with the other one because they're two different types of resistance lowering effects. Also, Counter-Strike is very powerful, so we max this out as well. It scales with our retaliation and procs on being hit pretty often. The ultimate skill we go for is Menhir's Bulwark because of the retaliation damage and extra survivability it provides. It is quite nice, and it's got that healing effect scaling as well. In terms of passives, a lot of these are good to get. You know, Soldier passives are fantastic. It's a big part of the strength of the class. You can pick up things like Decorated Soldier and Scars of Battle depending on what defenses you're missing from gear and which ones you need to get more of, so you can just juggle those around as you like. Veterancy is also okay. You can put some points into that if you want, but it's not a huge priority. Military Conditioning's good long-term for scaling up and getting huge amount of health. Since we have so much Physique, I dump all my points into Physique. I haven't spent a single point in Cunning or Spirit, and I hope never to. So that'll be a huge amount of life scaling from that. Don't miss out on shield training though. The block scaling in this is fantastic. Early on 5 points, eventually maxing for the extra shield. We're trying to max out that block. And definitely don't miss a couple points in Menhir's Will. At least 2 I think is pretty good. This is a cheat death proc. When you drop to 33%, it gives you a heal to bring you up at least about halfway, so that you can then get out of the fight and hopefully live. A few more points into that is extra safety net if you want to spend those points there. Similarly, Resilience is another proc. This procs its higher amount of health, 2/3 health, and gives you more sustain and survivability, so this prevents you from dropping down to low health in the first place. So this is your first layer of survivability, followed by the cheat death if things go very awry. Something I love about Grim Dawn actually is like the way the fights play out. Usually you die because of a series of mistakes, as in you've procced a series of these defensive skills and you've potion cooldown and you've blown your cooldowns at the wrong time and things like that, and you've continued to fight when you shouldn't have, and that's usually when you end up dying in Grim Dawn. So these give you plenty of opportunities to back off if things are going badly. The Devotion tree in Grim Dawn is a whole thing. I haven't fully planned or optimized, but there's some stuff I can strongly recommend, and maybe you guys can make some suggestions if you end up playing a similar build for whatever reason. Rushing towards Targo's Hammer is fantastic, and this is a huge reason for building around block, in addition just to the huge survivability it gives. This hammers spin out when you block, and depending on how much block cooldown and block chance you have, you can get a lot of these hammers out. You can get them, the limit on the actual skill is 0.1 second recharge. That's the internal cooldown for it. So if you scale your block down to the point where you can block constantly, then you can have up to 10 hammers spinning around you at once, and this scales with retaliation damage, which is just fantastic. Then you can grab a couple points in, say, like Lion in the Sailor's Guide here, and the Beetle for some various resistances, shield and retaliation sort of effects, and get Messenger of War, which gives a powerful retaliation effect when we get hit. So that's a very powerful buff, so pretty nice and I just put that on field command. Then later on, once you get to around the point I'm at now, you know, mid level 50s-ish, you start picking up things like Shield Maiden, which has some nice retaliation and block scaling on it, actually very strong. And then with a couple extra points for the requirements, you can get into Obelisk of Men here, which also has powerful block and retaliation effects. And then, look at that, 100 retaliation from that node there. And then also the powerful Stone Form defensive skill here, which also gives more retaliation. So we can put this on Menhir's Bulwark once I pick it up for some extra juiciness. After that, I'm not sure. You know, Turtle's always good. Maybe there's something else we can pick up. You guys feel free to put in your suggestions you might have for extra devotions in the tree. Keep an eye out as you're leveling for items that'll help you out. There's a lot of monster infrequents and specific things you can try and get that'll help you out. Pretty common set is the Perdition set, gives a bit of Ash Retaliation. They're not super amazing, it's a decent set, and if you can get a couple pieces of that, I'm using 2 right now, it's not really worth shooting for the set bonuses unless you have not very good gear otherwise, but if you have something better, you know, I have a shoulder piece as well for the 3 set, but I have, you know, just a much stronger shoulder piece here, so I'm just using that instead. But something like, for example, this is a monster infrequent here. It drops from Flesh Warped enemies in this act over here, somewhere around Conflagration area, I believe, or possibly up around here. But the Flesh Warped in that area will drop this all the time, and it always drops with nice retaliation and bonuses to Counter-Strike. So this is a really nice chest. You can quite easily farm up a decent one just by killing a couple packs of those enemies, and several of those will drop, so you can easily get that chest to use, and it works pretty well until you eventually can find some other upgrade. And just to reiterate once again, don't forget to use your components. It can be a bit overwhelming trying to get so many resistances in Grim Dawn, but components take the major brunt of that, you know. 60% of my vitality resist, for example, is coming from soul shards that I've socketed into my jewelry. So don't be afraid to get all of those components rolling and make use of them. They're very powerful. So that's a look at my work in progress. Retaliation, Thorns, Reflect, double shield wielding thick boy build. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. I've enjoyed playing it very surprisingly. I didn't think it would be very fun to play, but just like building around procs and scaling up the defensive mechanics in Grim Dawn, it's just very satisfying. It's just a refreshing pace to be able to have some like protracted fights with enemies and know that your defenses are doing some serious work and that it actually means something. The game really does well for building a defensive tanky character, and playing hardcore is a lot of fun in it. So if you for some reason decide to follow in the build, maybe you just find it entertaining or you've learned something, let me know what you think in the comments below. Also, I would just like to announce I'm very pleased to say that Grim Dawn has been added to my official game store. If you're considering picking up the game or any of the expansions and you haven't yet, please consider buying through my store, as a cut does go to me. I work directly with these indie devs to sell these games, and I'm very happy to have Grim Dawn on there, because the whole idea of this store is to have my handful of favorite games that I constantly go back to in the store. So I'm very happy that Grim Dawn's there. It wouldn't have felt complete without it. So you guys maybe consider checking it out. Anyway guys, that is it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thank you very much for watching.